This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Today we're dealing with a Zephyr range hood that needs a new controller, and we're going to be going over how to replace it. This is what the range hood looks like. We took out the 3 filters below first, and I unclipped zip ties so that I could take out a modular connection. So here we are, and I've disconnected the modular connector that goes to the controller between the controller and the blower motor, and I've also taken out the modular connector that goes to the LED lights, and I've taken out the little modular piece that goes from the touchpad to the controller. So the next thing I'll do is remove this ground wire and I'm just use a pair of pliers to loosen it, and I'm taking off the nut to get the ground wire off. Here's the controller, and the next thing I'll need to do is to take off some screws that are holding it on. To do that, I'm using Phillips head screwdriver to remove a couple of screws here at the top, and then I'm going to be separating this casing that has a magnetic strip. So you can just use your hands to separate it and pull these two parts of the ducting off. They're actually not the ducting, but they're more for just aesthetics. And then we're going to use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove 2 Phillips head screws here at the top of the ducting. So these are held in with Phillips head screws, but also have magnetic strips. Pretty cool design. So we get those 2 screws out, and then we can separate this casing. I used a standard head screwdriver to kind of get the 2 to be separate, and then I was able to break the magnetic strip connection. And Zephyr was the place we bought the new controller at. Pretty good price, $150 for the new controller. So I'm using a screwdriver to separate it, pulling these apart. And this is going to allow me to get to where the power connection is for the controller, and also the screws that are holding the controller into position. I'm just going to get those out of the way. And then here are these little black screws here, Phillips head screws. There's 5 of them that are holding the controller into place. At the very top here, we also see this yellow wire. It's bringing power to the controller, and we have to do the power connection there too to get the controller out. So now it's loose, but it's still being held in by its power wires at the top. So I'm going to climb up a little bit higher, and I'm going to undo these 2 Phillips head screws so I can pull out the power wire and undo the 3 wire nuts, one for the ground, one for the hot, and one for the neutral. So make sure you've got the breaker off at this point, because you don't want to do this while it's energized.
It's pretty cool how they designed this to be easily replaceable.
And then we're going to go ahead and spin those off, and then once they're all off, we can feed those wires down inside the casing, and that's going to let the controller be free. So we're just getting those wire nuts off, and then we can feed the wires down inside, and then we can get the controller out and do a little bit of work transferring the wires to the new controller. So now we have the old one and the new one, and we're going to remove the 2 Phillips head screws here from the old controller, And then we're going to take a small standard head screwdriver and we're going to go lefty-loosey to remove these, not remove, but loosen these 3 screws. One for the ground, one for the hot, one for the neutral. And we can pull that wire assembly out. And then I'm going to feed it into the new controller, the same orientation for the 3 wires. You got the green wire, white wire, and the black wire. So I'm going to feed them in the same way. First I'm loosening the 3 jacks that are going to accept the wires. Carefully get these wires in, push them as far in as they're going to go, and then we're going to tighten it up righty-tighty and get that connection really tight. Then what I'll do is I'll wrap the wires together so that I can push them back up through the hole in the metal case. So I can, I'm going to be pushing that up here right now up through that hole. Then I'll reach up with my other hand and grab those wires and pull them up through. And then I can feed the new controller up into that area. There we go. So we get that up in there. We're going to pull the wires through. Push the controller up in, and then all I need to do is just put it back together by putting those 5 black screws in that hold the controller in position, and then hook up my wire connections again. And then I have to plug in there's 3 modular plugs I've got to do. I've got to do one for the blower motor, I've got to do one that brings power to the lights, and I've got to do one that goes to the touchpad. Make sure that you are careful putting the touchpad modular connector back, because it has a bunch of little pins that can get bent pretty easily. So just take your time. So I'm twisting on these wire nuts. Keep those all tight. And then we're going to be putting the wires back into, there's a little cavity there, a little metal cavity that will accept the wires and the wire nuts. Be a little bit careful that you're not having the wire touch anything sharp, because it can push off the plastic coating, and then when you turn it on, it'll ground out, and that would not be good. So get those nice and tight, then push them back in, and we're going to put the cover back on there too. So you just want to be careful again that you don't have the wire come in contact with any sharp edges, because you don't want to have the plastic insulation removed where it will ground out when you turn the breaker back on. Okay, we get that in. We're going to put the plate back on with the 2 Phillips head screws. We're adding the black Phillips head screws back in that hold the controller in place. They're coming in from the back. And then once that's done, we just have to hook up the modular connections that go back onto the controller, and then put the magnetic cases back into position, and then we put the filters back in, and you're all done. So I hope that's been helpful to you, and you get your controller changed out in your new Zephyr. Thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe.